being there. And I remember being walked through that fluid with him. And I was trying to look up at him, and I couldn't turn my head to look at him. And he had his hand straight. I knew his voice, but I did not know who it was, but I felt confident and comfortable. And as we moved along this dark blue fluid path with like chartreuse covering the, you know, how when you look into a pool and you see the ripples, and if you're at the bottom of the pool, you'll see the ripples overlapping. That's what it looked like. And then when we got to the end of it, he said to me, if you could have anything in the world, what would it be? Now, we were really poor. My dad had just gotten out of prison, you know, for manslaughter. I didn't have much, but I said to him, I want to know how everything works. And at that moment, he used his left hand and he opened up the door. And there was this mansion, big brown doors. And inside of it was this crystalline flowers, big crystalline flowers, like a giant, like 5 feet across. And every time I tried to see his face, he would reach in and hand me another shape. And I was so fascinated with the shapes because they didn't look like the platonic solids. They didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before. And he would hand me these shapes, and each shape was different and amazing. And I woke up from that dream. But after that moment, anytime something strange would happen in a dream, I had the powers of inception. Anytime something, I would be naked at school, I would say, I'm not naked. I must be dreaming. And immediately I would run out of the school or run out of wherever I was, and I would find that mansion again. And I had access to all the knowledge. The proof of it is the 97 patents that I have now. The proof of it is the industries that I've innovated. It's like waking up, having a dream that you have a diamond in your hand, and out of nowhere, you wake up and you're hoping you're holding it, and you try and hold it, and it's gone when you wake up. But the proof is all the stuff that I've been able to do now.
So all these thoughts are from the time you were a baby. These are not things that you've learned. These are things that you had in your mind from the time you were born.
From before that time, because I remembered that I had been someplace else before. Now, what's interesting, that voice that I heard, that's my voice now. So it was like my greater self was leading me through, and periodically would show up again in other dreams. And I went off and became an actor because my mother wanted my little brother to be an actor, and I thought if I became an actor, you know, I would get my mother's affection. It wasn't until my mother was dying, and I'm talking to her, and she told me the reason that she was babying Antonio was because he had asthma, and my father always had questioned whether it was his son or not because he looked so much like her family and didn't look so much like him. And I realized, my God, if I had followed my proper course, I could have saved my mother, because the knowledge that I had, you know, I had the grand unified field equation. I had already put that together, and at 7, 8, I was working with these things, and then I went through all of the hell that I had to go through. Being accused of domestic violence, all of those things, and I thought it was a curse at the time, but it was really removing me from advancing down the wrong path. And during that period of time, I started waking up in my dreams again. And I started going back into that palace. And I remembered all of these things, and I started patenting them. As I moved along, I got in touch with Michael Hudak. He was the president of the University of Science and Philosophy, because I was studying a guy named John Keeley, you know, who had worked with frequency back in the 1870s, had built the first what do they call it, self-sustaining engine, back in 1872, but he wouldn't tell people how he built it. And I was watching a program with Del Pons, and somebody in the audience said, doesn't John Keeley's work remind you a lot of Walter Russell? And a bell went on. And so I got in touch with the University of Science and Philosophy after watching some stuff about Walter Russell, and and Michael Hudak, took me under his wing and started talking to me. But he was more into the philosophy and the love that Walter was talking about. But my intention was to rebuild the periodic table, build a new periodic table, because the stuff I had learned in college, I went to school for chemical engineering the first year over at Pratt. And they, at the time, I think it was like 108 elements. And I told the teacher, the professor, about the relationship between hydrogen on the spectrometer and carbon and silicon and cobalt. And I was like, it's the same exact color, same tone, just doubled in each octave. And he was like, no, each element is the same element and it will always be that element. And I was like, you don't see the relationship. So I left school and I was going to spend 40 years rebuilding the periodic table. And I found out that Walter Russell had already did that. And he did it based upon the natural curvature of everything.
And when you say rebuild the periodic table, what do you mean specifically?